Hey folks, wake up! It's almost 8:30 at night here, but wake up nonetheless. It's the Unsung Podcast. I am Mark, joined by Christopher. Say hi, Christopher.
I'm bright and alert. However, our third member,
I have just woke up about 4 minutes ago. I set myself 3 alarms. We joked about me doing this at 4 in the morning, and I messaged you at about 4 in the morning saying, what am I like? Here I am at 4 in the morning. I could have done it then, but I went and had a 2.5 hour disco nap. So
that's Crag in Australia, accompanied by Bob the Dog.
Oh, he's sleeping just fine. He's had his morning self-gammy for our Scottish listeners, and he's hopefully going to behave himself in the background there. What he's been up to?
Well, try to improvise new episodes, mainly, and just want to make sure that we tie this in nicely here so that Mark gets full credit. As well as that being an unconventional unsung podcast greeting, it's actually also really pertinent because this week we've decided to do a Covermount mixtape, and the Covermount mix that we're doing is titled Wake Up, and it comes from Uncut magazine from February in 2007. It's a change to the advertised programming, although I don't know if we even advertised any programming.
No, we didn't,
because that's kind of how we roll when we're trying to fit in interviews and things like that. But that's the direction we're going to go, and Craig, you're going to be back on pretty soon for another episode that we actually did plan on an actual band.
Indeed.
An actual band.
But the Covermount mixtapes are good fun, nice and spontaneous. We'll see how that goes. Before we get to that, Mark, do you have any admin, any housekeeping?
Yeah, Dominic Tarn, thank you for joining us as a member of our digital record club.
Good, Dominic. What a guy.
So well done for that.
I think you're rolling in a dough. Do I see some kind of tablet in your hand?
It's, for the first time in the history, I've zapped myself forward into 2014 and I got myself an Android tablet.
Saving the environment, sort of. I mean,
are tablets good for the environment?
No, I mean, as long as you don't bin it anytime soon, you're probably going to be alright.
I get the feeling that the cumulative damage it does, even when I do bin it, probably outweighs the paper that I might have recycled. But then again, trees might disagree. If you're a tree, write in.
Yeah, here, do you want to see something mad? This is not good for podcast material, but this is how mental I am. You know, I do a radio show here in Australia. There's my notes. That's what, like,
our one episode, or just
that's
compiled?
What a 200,000 word document looks like, wrapped in placky bands.
Nice.
That looks like the stuff that the Zodiac Killer sent to the police.
It does, yeah. I tried to tidy this room yesterday, and I ended up just wrecking the joint, so I'm still in a bit of a mess.
Well, thanks for doing this, man. I know it's an awful task getting up before 7 a.m. when you've only got to bed at the back of 4.
Aye. So just make sure I've got the right one as well, because this is a bit last minute, as you said. So it's Uncut magazine presents Wake Up, a 15-track guide to new North American indie audio CD from 2006, I believe.
Hang on, look, I'm actually holding it up. There you go.
You are, aye.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, for our sins, we actually have the physical copies of the fucking CDs we do, which is just somebody has to own them.
Just to illustrate for the listener, the CD itself, because music did used to be on things instead of just in the ether. I think it's like a compass. Maybe it's sort of like a clock meets a compass. I guess that's either a reference to the wake up thing or something to do with like navigating across the sea to North America. Maybe both. But yeah, that's what it is.
Obviously, I think we've done about 5 or 6 of these now, so people understand. Mm-hmm. I was a bit nervous about this one just when I seen it was uncut.
Why is that? Why? No, let's just analyse that first. What does Uncut say to you? Because obviously people listening probably don't get that magazine. A lot of them anyway.
It's just, who was on the cover of this magazine? I didn't even look that up. That's the kind of thing Mark does.
I did, actually. On the cover is Tom York. This came out on the 10th anniversary of OK Computer, and so somewhat predictably Uncut magazine had done a 10th anniversary special on one of the albums of the 90s. Some other names that were on that cover were Elvis Costello, Mercury Rev, Aerosmith, The Doors, the Manic Street Preachers, The Stooges, Nick Cave and Ozzy Osbourne. So that's a typically backwards facing edition of Uncut magazine. It is one of those magazines, along with Mojo and Q, that seemed obsessed with Pink Floyd and Bob Dylan and any kind of classic, not even classic rock in the kind of big stadium sense, but sort of tastemaker, inoffensive Audi rock. Only music that you can play in an Audi. So,
not to point any fingers, which I'm literally doing at you right now, this is from your catalogue, isn't it?
No, I went to a charity shop, so it did go to a good cause.
Yeah, I bought Uncut once.
I got a really good copy of Uncut once. It was like because they did a lot of stuff to do with films as well. It wasn't just music. And it was the first time I ever heard Elliott Smith, the tune that had Miss Misery that had been in Good Will Hunting.
Hunting, yeah.
Good attitude. Do you miss me? Misery, like you say you do.
Yeah, that was on the CD, and that obviously got me really into Elliott Smith. But it's an awfully boring magazine. It's just one of those things that's just very sort of mainstream and normie, and a little bit takes itself a wee bit too seriously. I will say also on the front cover were some names like Ray LaMontagne, who I think was fairly new at that point. But yeah, it's a fairly backwards looking magazine, and I have to say I expected worse from the Covermount CD. Not to give the game away, but we've done some absolute howlers on this, and this is not one of them.
Yeah, I thought a good way to start, especially with you and I, Chris, is what was going on in 2006.
Yeah, what were you doing? More to the point, Craig.
So I'll start there. I was about 24, and I was getting into that phase of like.
Can we leave the ages out yet, please?
Yeah, yeah. I'll get to that. I actually wrote down how old you were. I think I was getting into that phase where I was getting into like Elliott Smith and Jason Molina.
I finally got it. All parts wrong. I didn't know how.
Damien Jurado, Bonnie Prince Billy and stuff like that, because I was mature and sensitive, of course, and not just into fucking Big Destroyer, Dillinger and Pantera and the likes. That was just like such a fucking trope, to be honest. It's also when I started actually reading for pleasure and not just for like education. So maybe I did just grow up a wee bit, and I didn't really, because I was reading all the dirty stuff like Bukowski and Irvin Welsh, rinsing and repeating all that. Yeah, that was when you get your first hip replacement, wasn't it? And Mark lost his VL.
Mark, have you lost your VL?
Have you?
I think so. It was real. I've told you a story before, man. It was with a lassie that lives at my gran's bit. Like you'll not know.
A lassie that lives at your gran's bit. Is that not your mum?
Did you ever say that? Did you ever get cunt saying that when they were younger? No.
Is that know your mum? So I had a look at the year in the top 100 of the tracks that were going on. Shakira, Hips Don't Lie. Sexy Back by the Old Trouser Snake. Goodbye My Lover by the one and only Jimmy Blunt. Rehab by Amy Winehouse. Crazy by Gnarls Barkley. And a whole bunch of shite. But nothing worse than our very own lassie Faye Banff, Sandy Tom, who is so punk that she wished that she had flowers in her hair.
Oh, I wish I was a punk rocker with flowers in my hair. 77 and 69, revolution was in the air. I was born too late into a world that doesn't care. Oh, I wish I was a punk rocker.
Aye.
Yeah, she's quite the character, as old Sandy.
Aye. I've heard that, yeah.
I've never heard that said. Is that a thing?
Did you ever see her total meltdown
No?
Oh, you need to Google it, mate. Like,
well, you've talked about it on the podcast before, I think. There was, I can't remember.
yeah, basically, yeah. Apparently she'd been trying for years to get playlisted in Radio 1 and Radio 2, and she wrote a song which was, in her words, completely custom built for getting played in Radio 2. It never happened. She had a massive meltdown online about it and was doing like videos of her greeting and all that, and it was a whole thing. So yeah, that was not too long ago.
So 2006 would have been a bit different for you, Mark. What was going on with you then? Hanging out in the gallery of modern art?
I'm a bit older than that, mate. Wee bit older than that. No, I think in 2006 I was still really into stuff like Killswitch Engage and all that, like heavy stuff, do you know what I mean? So getting into hardcore and stuff, getting away from new metal and emo and into hardcore and stuff like that. So yeah, before this completely escapes my head, by the way, there's something I just want to bring us back around to. It's like, you know, this is the second Uncut Covermount we've done, right? The first one was the playlist. Do you remember that episode?
Yeah, that was fucking banal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Small Faces, Susie and the Banshees, Jarvis Cocker, the Waterboys, stuff like that. So that really kind of clues you into like the kind of dull magazine that this was. So I mean, that was 2006, so that was not long before.
It still is a dull magazine.
Is it still going? Yeah,
yeah.
I only bought it once. It was it would have been around this time, and I was going to Canada. 9 of us, but that's when the days when I had a CD Walkman and we went to Banff, Canada. There's a wee connection to Banff Sandy Tom. But nice. I made a lifelong love of an artist called Kelly Joe Phelps. There was a song called Not So Far To Go on that CD.
Bar in New York City, and it's not so far to go. It's not so far to go. Oh no.
And I still listen to that artist this day, out of, whatever 14 tracks were on that CD. But that's the only time I ever bought Uncut.
I had just come back from doing some music in the States. Musically, what was going on at the time, I don't really recall. It felt like a bit of a transitional phase. Felt like I was growing out of a lot of that not grown out, but looking for post-hardcore stuff that was a bit less about histrionics. I felt like a lot less impressed by like At the Drive-In and stuff like that. I think from that point onwards I was just less impressed with folk just flailing about, because that's basically what we did for most of being in a band, was just flail about. And then we realised there was a point where we should probably do a little bit more than that. I was quite into the Arcade Fire, and I think that's an important reference here, because the track Wake Up, big single for that band, lends this compilation its name, and I think that's quite telling, right? Because Funeral, the album that track came from, was 3 years old at this point, and Neon Bible was actually released the following month. Black Mirror, the single, which was the first single of Neon Bible, was already out. Had been for a few weeks, and Arcade Fire had been touring the new record around, and they were doing loads of novel publicity. I think there was a bit like what Depeche Mode did years ago. You could phone up a number and listen to the album. There was a lot of kind of like teasing and stuff going on in the press and building up a lot of anticipation, because Arcade Fire had made a big splash when they arrived and had continued to make a big splash, if you know what I mean, unlike so many bands. You get the feeling that Uncut had one eye on that clearly, but also was trying to capture a bit of a zeitgeist, and maybe a sense in the media in general at this point they were trying to maybe spot the successor to Arcade Fire. I mean, that sounds daft because they were just really getting going, but I think already you can sense that folk were looking at these guys, and there's a couple on here that I think are on here because somebody said, they're going to be the second wave of whatever this movement is. And I think, Arcade Fire, Canadian, this is a North American collection, but it's got quite a number of Canadian musicians on it. It's not just American. So yeah, I think that really kind of sets the scene for where Uncut, and not just Uncut, a lot of magazines and even TV shows, like I think Gonzo was still on then, maybe. That kind of school of stuff anyway. They were starting to gravitate towards us. Crag, we know a lot of bands that sort of really started to emerge into that scene. I think Mutual Friends and Admiral Fallow owed a lot to what was happening in that movement. Frightened Rabbit as well.
Mm-hmm. When we go through the track by track, we'll probably touch on a lot of those similarities as well. Who was taking influence from who? What was going on in the world at the time, kind of thing. You can kind of map it out. When I seen this was an Uncut CD, I was expecting the worst, and although it's very twee, I actually had quite a good time with it. Just showing my cards, I guess, a wee bit.
It's a strange movement, because I did think at the time, we'll talk about it a bit in conclusion as well, but I did think at the time it's a weirdly safe movement to sort of reboot folk and Americana, but give it a bit of an indie zhuzh, just like sort of, it's energised folky stuff. There were all these fiddles and fucking banjos and stuff appearing on stage, and there was a lot of sort of nice guy antics. Do you know what I mean? For example, let's say like the Icarus line and all that kind of thing, that was out the window. There were none of these bands that were deliberately trying to be antisocial. These bands were quite conformist. It was quite safe. It doesn't mean it was all bad, but there was something weirdly non-threatening about it, and a little bit flannelly, maybe even, dare I say, corduroy. So yeah, it's a weird time. One thing that's interesting, I found the article written about the Covermount from Inside Uncut, and there's not a hell of a lot going on in it. They weirdly focus really on a couple of tracks that I'll mention when we're going through them, but it does say the CD was compiled by Stephen Truss and Alan Jones. So Stephen Truss is actually, or Trussy, I'm not entirely sure, he's still a writer for Uncut. That's how I know that Uncut's still a magazine, because I saw that, I think he published something about 2 weeks ago. But Alan Jones is a bit more interesting. So he was the former editor of Melody Maker. I think he joined the magazine in the mid to late 70s, and apparently got his job there by writing a letter to them that said, Melody Maker needs a bullet up its arse and I'm the gun, so pull the trigger. Which is a fucking bold move. But I do think it's also interesting that somebody that reckoned that it needed a bullet up its arse and he was the gun, pull the trigger, went on to curate this like offensively inoffensive collection of indie folk rock. He didn't really blow the doors off that guy, did he? Although apparently that guy Alan Jones also was once called a stupid shit on stage by Roger Waters. Apparently Roger Waters had taken exception to a negative Pink Floyd review, and so I actually think that's in Alan Jones's favour. History is proving him right. But yeah, we'll dig into the record and get a sense of where it is.
Firstly, for the Patreons and the unsung AAA, can you spell zhuzh? How does one spell that?
Nah, because when I said it, I was like, I hope nobody calls me.
No, everyone knows what it means. Zhuzhing it up a bit, but how do you spell the titular zhuzh?
Well, can we? I could take my lead from that band Zhuzh, couldn't I, and just be like XIUX.
Is that how you say that?
That suffice.
It was like Zhao Zhao or something like that.
Is it? I thought it was Zhuzh.
We're in Uncut land already. We've not even introduced the first track, and we're getting there.
So the first track I think is quite telling, because like I was saying, I think this magazine was trying to sort of capture a zeitgeist and spot the next big thing on that scene. I think the first Band of Horses, are exactly that. Or at least they were in the minds of people at the time. The track's called Weed Party. Band of Horses had a sort of minor hit with the track Funeral, which was it was synced in a whole load of quite high profile American TV.
Really too late to call, so we wait
think it made a lot of student radio airplay and stuff like that, and generally speaking they did pretty well off the back of that. This track comes from that same first album. They're obviously not going to give away Funeral for free, but this isn't the best track on that. They were somewhat championed as figureheads. They did get quite a lot of momentum early on, although I don't think they ever really quite delivered on that momentum. The second album, Cease to Begin, I think was a lot better. It was a bit edgier. I mean, they're never an edgy band, but it was a little bit darker, a little bit more challenging. This one just sounds a bit too, ironically, a bit too American for me. It's a bit too polished and going to college, falling in love, a bit too emo, actually.
Yeah, I remember my girlfriend at the time really liked this band, and I think they're trying to be a bit kind of less Uncut with this kind of edgy programmer or whatever, Weed Party, Wow. And it opens up with a good old yeehaw, and it kind of sets the scene for the whole CD. It's not bad, it's just a kind of representation of this whole thing we're talking about. I can see kids at the time having a good time on the green beach. For those of you not from Glasgow, that's essentially a patch of green grass where all sorts of people kind of come together, and I can't imagine what it's like at like modern times, like nowadays with like Bluetooth speakers and all that. But in my day there was a guy who had a thing called Techno Pram, and it was like a pram for a baby, and it had like a car battery in the bottom of it and fucking massive speakers on it. And then there was another guy with a techno trolley. It was the same thing, but the guy with the pram sold eckies, so he always kind of won out. So fuck knows what it'd be like now. When was the last time you ventured to the Green Beach? You said it's snowing there now, yeah?
It was snowing today, yeah. We're lucky though, right? Glasgow's in a very, very green city. It's for people not from here, it is the second most parks in the UK outside of London. There you go.
Dear green place.
For anyone that thinks it's a big sprawling fucking concrete jungle, it's really not.
Well, it's both. It's totally both.
Well, it's a bit of both, but it's got huge patches of greenery right in the middle of the city. Anywhere you go, it's got Kelvin Walkway and all that stuff, right? It's really...
This is when you can see people punching horses and stuff like that. When too many people gather on the 2 days of sun.
I was going to say, what we don't have, we've got the green, we just don't have the sun or the weather that enables people to gather on them. And, vice versa. I know we've got listeners in the likes of Tel Aviv where they've got all the sun in the world, and, I mean, they would thank you for a green patch. They just get together in these dried out verges at the side of the road that used to be grass. They're maybe just brown straw now. So I don't want to be complacent. I don't want to take for granted what we've got.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like going somewhere like that now. Like it used to be kind of the loudest would win out, like the techno pram guy kind of thing, and then everyone would get up. I think Lemmy did a good sketch on it and being like, this is how shite it is.
I tell you that there's something to be said for it, because now you've got so many Bluetooth speakers competing. You get really pissed off when the people next to you have got a more powerful Bluetooth speaker and they're just banging out some acid techno, and you're trying to listen to some James Blunt. So I mean, there's something to be said for just having one techno pram, so that whatever's getting played, at least it's not a big fucking melee, like 14 different Bluetooth speakers.
Yeah, just white noise. Just ends up becoming white noise. It can be a bit brain damage for sure. This song, man, it's pretty benign, right? Like this record, I guess, in general, is quite benign. Some good songs on it, some...
Like this era.
Yeah, fairly shit songs on it. It's interesting you mentioned emo, because some of the rhythm guitar does remind me of more later emo, obviously less jangly. So there's a wee bit of that, but it's probably more of a college rock thing, to be honest. It's kind of made its way across the genres, I suppose. I was actually quite surprised at how lacking in hooks this song was for an opener. It's not. I was hoping for something with at least a hummable chorus. I couldn't tell you what this song sounded like now, and I only listened to it like about an hour ago. The last time I listened to it was about an hour ago. Do you know what I mean? So
I honestly think that's an accusation you can level at not just a lot of the bands here, but a lot of the bands in this movement. They were like inoffensive and they did a lot of things right, but they just didn't often nail anything that had any longevity to it. Band of Horses did, but I don't think this is one of them. They've got more of them on their subsequent album.
Do you think they did alright? 2006, or we're kind of getting to the death of that making money from music kind of thing? Do you think a lot of these bands were able to sustain being musicians and being in bands, and now they're just a guy in a pub being like, "Oh, I used to play in a band. Oh, what was it called? Band of Horses." Never heard of it.
No, they're still touring. I mean, I think they still tour to reasonable audiences. I think this was probably a really difficult time because things were in flux. Labels were still spending like the old days, but then not bringing in money, and this was in the process of changing, so there was a lot of things going out of business at this point. I am not sure what the economics were like. Maybe bands were still getting overly generous contracts and it was the labels that were suffering, and then that changed. I really don't know, but you know, they did stick about, and they do still make an appearance, and they're well enough thought of. Like, I think they do. For example, you're saying your ex-partner used to really like them, but I think there's a lot of sentimentality associated with this band, you know, and there's a generation of people with a lot of expendable income now that would probably rush back to see them. I would probably consider going to see them just because there is a bit of a nostalgia thing, even though there's maybe only 3 or 4 tunes that I would give a shit about. So, I don't know. I don't think they're the worst choice to start. I agree with Mark. It's not a particularly striking tune, and actually they've got a lot in common for me mentally with Broken Social Scene, the second band on here, with the track Fire-Eyed Boy. Broken Social Scene were really well thought of, seemed like they were going to get big, were sort of big, but never really had a standout hit, you know. As I understand, the thing that I first took notice of them for was certainly none of their songs, but just the alumni of this band. There's people from Metric in it. I think it's people from Do Make Say Think. But I tried getting into the group and I never really got into them.
Yeah.
They seemed like a sort of somewhere between a King Tut's band and like a Mono or Stereo in Glasgow. That's the kind of hipper vegan end of the spectrum. They were straddling this weird place where a lot of hipsters knew the people in the band, but the music seemed like it was trying to be mainstream.
I think Broken Social Scene is just a kick-ass name. A lot of people liked the name or wore the t-shirt, but I never really got into them. But it's a good track too, coming off a Band of Horses. It speeds it up a bit. I kind of like it. It sounds like the drummer's in the wrong band, I think.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's very of its time. A lot of bands, especially here in Australia, are actually sounding exactly like this now, which is...
I've got a note of the same thing. Yeah,
they've
absolutely.
It's like the latest sound. There's a wee middle bit in it. Sounds a lot like this super underground band that I love, a Swedish band called Malaya Falls. But at this stage, I'm not having a bad time, 2 tracks into it.
Can I maybe introduce you to a bad time? Because the third track in this is by a band called Swan Lake, and it's the tune's called it's called All Fires.
You have good friends, you have a lover. When friendships end, you will still love her.
I'd never heard of this band. I've never heard anything of this band since. I think it's pretty easy to see why I didn't hear more of this band. This band is one of those kind of, again, actually a wee bit like Broken Social Scene, one of those kind of hipster Nick Hornby-esque supergroups that the label Jaguar that they were on wasted loads of cash on over the years. Like, they used to put out Blood Brothers side projects and all that kind of stuff. It has members of Frog Eyes, Destroyer and the New Pornographers, none of whom I would say were much to get excited about in the first place. The Swan Lake released 2 records, and I think the debut was a few months prior to this compilation coming out, so this is obviously a push by the magazine. One of the band had famously described their sound as a boar dying in a tar pit, and I think that's a wildly optimistic assessment. It's way more interesting.
This is where you can tell that someone's actually taken some time in programming this. Like, we've done a few of these now, and you can tell that people don't really give a hoot about it. There's a kind of a male kind of Mazzy Star vibe to this. And as we all know, that's like catnip to us of a certain age. But I think it's mixed or produced like terribly, and it's really, really quite grating on the old lugs.
It's interesting. I mean, they were a band for not very long. I think they were only a band for 4 years, right? Side project. But from what I can see, they don't have a drummer. There's a very scant percussion in this song, you know. So it just, the production is horrible. Truly horrible in this song.
Yeah, it's really grating. Yeah, I had to actually, I had to skip it before the end of it. So if drums did come in, I didn't get it.
They're hardly there. You could barely tell they were there, to be honest. Before we move on, I want to go back to Broken Social Scene for a second. I agree with Crag and saying the drums feel like they're out of place, but it actually sounds like there's two drummers in that song.
Well, that was the deal with Do Make Say Thing.
Yeah, so that's why I think there might be a little bit of shared DNA there, you know, in terms of the songwriting approach. But I actually, the reason why I come back to it, it's kind of mathy, and it's actually something that I've never heard them before, and I actually might explore them a little bit more after hearing that song, because it has a lot in common with the song the other side of it, but it just feels as though it's a lot more well realised, I guess.
I'd like to hear a bit more kind of cohesion from the band. Like Chris, I was very aware of them. They were of a certain level, a tier of a kind of venue cap size and stuff. And like I say, they were kind of a hipster band. I'd like to see if they ever found that kind of cohesion, and the drumming does sound out of place, which would have been great live, I'm sure.
This is interesting. In real time, I can tell you that they had, according to Wikipedia, anything from 6 to 19 members.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So it's pretty likely that you may be hearing multiple percussion in there. It also featured Feist, who was big for a while.
It looks like the touring lineup changed every year as well, so I guess it was just very much a collaborative project, which is, I guess, is pretty cool in and of itself, right? I mean, even though they're quite hipstery, it seemed to be a constantly revolving door of people sort of held down by, as Kevin Drew and Brendan Canning.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're well enough thought of by enough people who know a bit about music that, yeah, there probably is merit to going and checking them out properly. I tried, I just never really got it. But you could be the one that brings me around, Mark. What you won't bring me around on is Tapes and Tapes in the track In Sister, the fourth one on here. I just think it's really hard to come up with notes of this song. I think it's really unremarkable. The best thing I could think of was that it sounds like a less drunk version of the band Two Gallants.
Well, I come from the old time, baby. Too late for you to save me. If I remain, then I'm to blame.
I really like Two Gallants, but their whole rambunctious, drunken bar brawl thing is part of what makes them really interesting, because a lot of what they do is sort of like Bostonian, faux Irish, kind of amplified, boozy shanty rock or something like that. It's really odd, and this is like a sort of very neutered version of it.
Yeah, I think this is another example of like evidence that someone has put some thought into the sequencing of it, and I appreciate that, because there's some shannas that we've even talked about on here, and I had to skip the last track because it was just a minute, or maybe it's just my tinnitus, but this tune, I guess it's kind of cool. It's a bit rockabilly with a modern take. I guess that's what you're talking about, Chris. There's a kind of mellow relentlessness kind of to it, which sounds like a weird kind of contradiction and a thing to say, but it just doesn't really stop. It just kind of keeps going. Like if the guitar cools off, then the drums really pick up, and then they all just go for it. I think it would be really good live. Like I say, still not having that bad a time. I'd never heard of this band at all. Tapes and Tapes.
Yeah, I just googled them, and they're right. So, full disclosure, I lost my notes just before recording, but I have just had a flashback to what I remember this song being after Googling the band and seeing a photo of them, because obviously I was doing a bit of research on or Wikipedia to see how many albums they had and all that. And this song sounds a bit like The Shadows with the guitar part, right? Like, it's kind of surfy almost, but it's also got like a 60s skiffle beat, which really did my fucking tits in, man. Like, it's not like that at all. But do you know what? I actually thought they're the kind of band I could see fitting really well on a bill with the Libertines for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, you know what? I hear a wee bit of the choral.
Yeah, the choral's a good shout, actually. It's a good reference point, actually. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Can you make up a good story, Mark, about how you lost your notes? Like you got chibbed on the bus for your all day ticket and your unsung notes.
Imagine finding our notes. That'd be the most disappointing fucking thing ever. And be like, fuck is this shit? I accidentally left my notes sitting in the cafe earlier on. I was like, it wasn't that I was like worried that I wouldn't have them for the show. It was that I hope nobody finds them and they think that guy's fucking pathetic.
This is just while looking at you, it's like, you know, those kind of conspiracy photos. So it's like ye olde black and white photo from like 1895, and there's like a guy with an iPhone. That's what you look like right now with your Kindle or whatever it is you've got.
It's a bad fit, yeah. It's been photoshopped in. Alright, track 5, Metric, The Police and the Private.
You're working for the police and the private, the pirates and the pilots, fingerprinted waiting for the train. The doctor, the writer, the hairdresser, felt up and fingerprinted waiting for the train.
So I really like Metric, although I went to see them about 6 weeks ago and it was really underwhelming, but that still doesn't stop me liking them. They are a band that, you know, they do blow hot and cold. This is a decent cut from a decent album, actually. They did have Better. The track Monster Hospital is an absolutely fucking brilliant bit of music, but you're not going to give away your best tune on a compilation. I think that also applies to Band of Horses with Funeral. Can understand them not using that prime cut, but it's a totally okay representation of them, and I think it's one of the better tunes on this. The singer, whose name I have completely blanked on, I think she was also part of Broken Social Scene. She's Canadian. I once saw her fall off a stage, which was absolutely brutal. I went to see them at Oran Moore years ago. Really, really good gig. They were touring a good album at the time. I think it was Fantasies. And she was dressed in this very sequined black kind of tight dress, looking very sophisticated, very suave. There was a group of women like clearly idolising her down the front, and then I think one of her heels just went on the Oran Moore stage and she just absolutely decked it off the stage onto the floor, and it was a brutal fall from grace, but you know, she recovered well. The band were really good. I really like them. It's a weird thing they try to do, which is that they're still definitely a band. They still write their own music, clearly, and they sometimes get it very right and they sometimes get it quite wrong, but they've got a really poppy thing going on.
So I've got a wee theory that this was kind of part of the start of that affectation thing that's kind of everywhere in vocals now, especially female vocals. And this song in particular sounds like that fucking Ill City song. What was it called? Fireflies or something? That was later. I think that was about 2009. But this is the kind of hipster part of it.
Lord, Lord, Mother, we are all losing love. Lord, listen, love, we are all missing Mama. Lord, Lord, Mother, we are all losing love. Lord, listen, love, we are all missing something.
The number 1 and 2 songs on Spotify are Black Sheep. One done by the actress Brie Larson. She did a version of this for the Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which I actually haven't seen. But I remember this band, but I remember them being better than this track. And
they are better than this track.
Yeah, my wee hot take on this, and probably in this whole scene, is the kind of the advancements made in technology, especially probably Pro Tools and the likes. Everything was becoming kind of homogenized. And I think this track's a really good example of that starting like modern kind of pop music now. So I think this track's a bit of an outlier in this kind of club. But
yeah, so see this band, I would say that one thing they fall victim to is their own ambition, which is that some of their tracks feel overproduced, especially recently. It does occasionally work, because ironically the track Monster Hospital that's on this same album was quite raw. It was well produced, but it had a real punky energy to it. It had that kind of yes thing. Right from the start, really, you could really feel and sense the ambition that they had to be like a breakthrough pop act that was a band. They try too hard sometimes, basically. I think that's it, and the studio goes along with it. And it sometimes good songs, actually well-written songs, suffer from being far too polished, and I think that's also the case with a live show as well. But they are better than this, but it's not too bad.
Had you ever heard of them, Mark?
Yeah, the song Black Sheep I think is an absolute banger. I think Scott Pilgrim's probably one of Edgar Wright's most underrated films. I don't remember this band being this twee, particularly the vocal delivery and some of the synth sounds.
I think Chris mentioned Feist earlier on, and I think that may be a lot to do with it. I really like Feist, but they had that big breakthrough with the Apple ad. I think the 1, 2, 3, 4 song.
Oh.
And I think a lot of bands who are traditionally, because Metric were a lot heavier, like Black Sheep's a lot heavier than the track that we're talking about now, and I think they were saying, all right, well, we can do that as well, just as well, especially with this kind of new kind of homogenized Pro Tools sound. So
I remember listening to them when I first heard Black Sheep, and I thought I was quite underwhelmed because a lot of it didn't sound like Black Sheep, but that was a long time ago, and I've always meant to go back to them and listen to them again. So maybe this will give me the push that I need. Even though I didn't really enjoy this song, it did remind me that this is a band that I was quite intrigued by.
To be honest, there's no danger that we're getting out of this podcast without me one day doing a Metric record anyway. They will make an appearance, because I do think there's a lot to talk about with them. Emily Haynes, by the way, that's the name of the singer that I forgot. So track 6, Beirut, Postcards from Italy. I couldn't decide if I really liked Beirut or not. I remember that it seems an inherently limited concept in hindsight due to the highly stylized nature of the vocals and that whole baroque melodrama that they have going on through it. You know, when you're doing that first or even your second record, you're like, yeah, this has got legs, and then by the time you get to a third record, you're like, fuck me, stop doing that same thing, please. And every Beirut song sounds like the same Beirut song, but there are better ones. There's a track called Nantes, named after the French city, that's really good, and I think it's a standout song. Beirut, I always associate with people like Owen Pallett and this breed of musicians that just had a really limited shelf life because of the sound they had. They were like thrust into the limelight, but you just knew they didn't have the staying power, and so it was quite annoying. Yeah, I mean, I almost never go back to Beirut now. As much as there was about 3 or 4 months I was really taken with it. It's a flash in the pan for me.
Yeah, I know this song really well because of the thing that we used to do in Glasgow, Crisp Orchestra, which was a big band of kind of unlikely performers who got together on a Monday night to do a couple of tunes and playing any instrument they could or learning a new instrument. And this song was really perfect for it because it's just really simple. But then there's that really nice rise in the bridge / kind of chorus, and it kicks in with lots of, again, unusual instruments, and they're all kind of coming to some kind of crescendo. And this is what you were saying before, Chris, about that Glasgow scene. Frightened Rabbit, Admiral Fallow, or Brother Louis Collective, as they were, Aerials Up, and etc., etc. That kind of vibe. There was hundreds of bands that sounded like this North American indie vibe, and we were there for that. We were promoting shows for bands like that, and it wasn't a bad time. But a lot of those bands are still going strong. But who was influencing who?
I don't really know. I mean, I think the Glasgow acts, not just the Glasgow acts, but the movement in the UK was very much imitating the success of like the Canadian and the American bands. But yeah, there was an explosion of this nice guy sort of comeback folk, modernised folk. I think some of the bands over here did it really, really well, though. It's very, that's that thing where often a first wave comes out and it's not necessarily the first wave that has the most success. The second wave of, people like over here, like Frightened Rabbit and Admiral Fallow and stuff, did really well. I think it was largely coming off the back of the innovation of some of these, like the Montreal kind of scene and Arcade Fire and people like that at the same time.
It could have been just the opportunity to make it in the States as well. What was going on around that, like the darkness or something like that, probably couldn't break the States, but bands like Frightened Rabbit, for instance, could.
But bear in mind that 2003, the biggest selling album was fucking Linkin Park, and then 2004, Arcade Fire came out with Funerals. Yeah. So it's a big fucking sea change, and Funerals was a weird one because it landed fairly big. It was on TV a bunch, but it didn't land like Nevermind. But its influence continued to grow. Like, they're a really fucking influential band as part of a movement as well. And I just think that we saw the second wave of that really over here. There were probably nascent acts that really just sort of found their sound when they heard that. But that's a totally natural thing to happen. I wouldn't say that as an insult or a criticism. I think it just happens. You're in a band and then you hear something and suddenly it all clicks for you. You're like, that is the thing. And then you become the second wave of something. It happened with post-punk, it happened with new wave, it happened with fucking grunge. Some of the best bands were not the first ones at the table, you know what I mean? Just
as a little aside note, this is terrible for a podcast, but there are 6 parrots sitting on the bush outside my window at the moment. The sun has just came up and they're red and green. I don't know what they are, but they're having a good wee time just outside the window.
Well, I'll have you know that there's 3 Jakies sitting in a Volvo fighting over a snout outside mine, so... Anyway, next track, and let's get serious. Track 7, TV and the Radio, the track Wolf Like Me. A really, really interesting, exciting band who I think still hold up well. I recently went to see the band Young Fathers, the Glasgow act, and I always saw a bit of a through line from TV and the Radio to Young Fathers in terms of that weird combination of indie, alternative hip hop, alternative pop. There's bits of Block Party, and I'm not just saying that because of them being non-white, but that incorporation of other musical influences into it, and the voice especially, the approach to singing was quite novel. I actually think this is debatably TV and the Radio's best song, which is a fucking bold inclusion on a compilation. It's a fucking great song, really, really good song, and it still sounds really good to me, and I would still happily rattle this on if I was, DJing a club night or something like that. I think really, really good band. Not all of the tracks are anything like as immediate as this, so it's a good first foot forward.
Yeah, this is an excellent tune. What's their biggest hit? The Staring at the Sun. I find this track is a bit of an outlier on a CD, I reckon. This was a big kind of club hit. I remember even seeing these guys at Sub Club in Glasgow, and back in the day I've even shared a bunk bed by a few of them, but that's another story. But this is an excellent tune, Wolf Like Me. Doesn't really fit with the rest of the programming. By track 7, where we're at now, this is just what I needed.
Yeah, can I just interject here and say it's an interesting decision, because TV and the Radio for me have put on what I think's their best, or at least definitely up there with their best, and certainly their most immediate song, whereas Metric and Band of Horses had to absolutely fucking stick on popular tracks on the albums and chose not to use them, and it'd be interesting to see what the benefits.
Yeah, we've still not got to the bottom of that. Remember when we first started doing this exercise, we weren't really sure of the economics of it as well, and maybe Uncut just had a bit more money to get to get
maybe the
bigger
band were
tracks.
just up for it.
Yeah.
Maybe the band were just like, fucking do it.
It's a whole different demographic reading Uncut than as reading Crag or something like that. So it's probably worth it because it's tapping into that audience that they would otherwise not have, that probably don't go to gigs. You know, it's older people.
The thing is, like, Monster Hospital had Metric gone with that. It was already 2 years old. It wasn't like it was a brand new single. And Band of Horses were about to release their next album when this was, you know, in the works. So, I don't know. I mean, there's an argument being like, oh, that track served as well. Let's get it out again. Let's just let people hear it. And I think TV and the radio maybe just thought that, like, fuck it. Another chance to get it under people's noses or in their ears. Yeah,
it's a really good song. That I'm not really hugely familiar with that, but with TV on the radio. But yeah, that's probably the best song on the record, easily. The production's really cool. It's actually quite catchy as well. Some great backing vocals on it too.
They're really multi-vocal, really interesting the way they layer stuff up. The production is really unusual. Mark, I think you'd really like them. There's a lot of crossover with hip-hop in the production and sort of trip-hop and stuff as well, like Bristolian sort of like interesting electronic stuff, but they have the energy of a band. And again, that's why I draw the parallels with Young Fathers. I think there's a rawness and a kind of innovation to them.
Yeah, TV and the radio, really great club band. I think a few years ago, one of the band members passed away. I can't remember the name, but maybe you guys know. But yeah, and it's rare you get those indie bands that are also club bands, if you know what I mean. You can play in places like Sub Club, and it's like you can get a dance floor going with it.
I think the thing is as well, they were a bit too oddball to really have breakthrough success in terms of pop concerts anyway, because their music could be it was almost ketamine at times. You know, it was really like some of it was quite druggy and weird, and they were too unconventional to, I think, have big mainstream success. But they walked a really interesting line between, like you say, that kind of like danceability, credibility, electronic underground, and then indie sounds and stuff like that. It's a cool group. I think, Gerard, somebody that in the band that died.
Gerard Smith, it was the bass player. 2011, he passed away. They're still going. Released an album in 2014, so it's been a while since they released something.
Check out the song or cut it in, Chris. Staring at the Sun. That's it's an absolute banger for any like DJ set. It just really builds.
So what about track 8, Voxtrot?
If you think you're throwing words to the wise, the first thing you ever felt, it's hiding under your belt. To a place that smothers children, cuts the space between two lives.
Ever heard of this band? The track's Mothers, Sisters, Daughters and Wives.
I had it in my head that this band was from Glasgow. I think there was a band with a similar name, Voxtrot. Obviously this is North American indie compilation, so obviously that's not true. I can't think of it. But this feels very 90s or early 2000s. It's got this kind of high school movie vibes. Gin Blossoms again, we've talked about them before.
I get the high school thing, yeah. I think it's like a nice enough B indie track. It's got hints of Death Cab for Cutie, but it gets a bit British in the chorus.
Yes, the singer's really quite good actually. I think this could have been a hit if he was a bit higher in the mix. It's kind of drowned out.
You know, it's the sound of like a million indie bands that burst into existence and then vanished, leaving behind just these sort of lesser heard, lovable little numbers. I think it's a totally decent little bit of music, but you could tell that this band, for whatever reason, didn't have something that it took to break through, whether that was staying power, maybe there was disunity in the band, maybe they just didn't have any
tunes. I think
I've
you
no
nailed
idea.
it there with the disunity in the band, because the singer's the best part about it. I think it's a kind of an overly ambitious guitarist and drummer, and I would put $50 on saying they probably wrote the song, but you know, I know nothing of this. It's just my theory.
I tell you, a band that we probably will remember, Deerhoof, track 9, and the track The Galaxist. Galaxist. I'm not sure what the emphasis is. So that actually, remember I said I had the article from Uncut about this compilation. He spends an inordinate amount of time focusing on this band in that article, like literally to the detriment of almost every other band featured. What he does go to great lengths to make us aware of is that Deerhoof are very much fawned over by bigger groups like Radiohead, Wilco, Flaming Lips, which he picks all of them out. Deerhoof are this like wacky indie, right? They're heavy on the time changes and all these like shifts and loads of playful tunelessness. The singer is Satomi Matsuzaki, I think her name is. She has a Yoko Ono thing going on, along with just like a kind of like, but it's playful, like it's deliberate, and they're incredibly hip.
So yeah,
incredibly well
our notes
thought
are
of.
so aligned here. I basically went through it and I wrote, "Cunts love this." I find this song kind of annoying, and I don't know why. It's in that dinner party music zone, because they're quite a diverse band. You can hear kind of people at a kind of dinner party asking, "Oh, what's this?" But I'm not stroking the bum fluff on my chin in my 20s anymore. Again, our notes are aligned, because my hottest take on this is if John and Yoko actually made good music, it would probably sound like this song.
So they're a total crossover band. I mean, I remember they were the band that sort of made the Down the Rabbit Hole festival, put it on the map. They played it one year and everybody took notice of it. The drummer, I think Greg Sonnier, wrote an entire album with the French group La Colonie de Vacances, which is the band that's like a super group made up of Electric, Marvin, Pneu, Papier Tigre, and I went on that tour with them, and he's a lovely guy. The music was fantastic, and so it's difficult to really talk negatively about it without feeling a bit conflicted. But I've never liked this band as much as everybody seemed to think I would like this band. Like they seem like they're like an indie version of Melt Banana or something like that, and it's like, oh, you'll be really into that, won't you? And I'm like, you know what, when I listen to them, it's like watching a football match where I don't care about either of the teams that are playing. Like, it plays out and I'm like, oh, that was good, oh cool, oh, he did well. But then it doesn't matter to me, you know. That's the thing about this band, like nothing they do matters to me. I can acknowledge the moves and the ability and the skill and the clever ideas and the attempts to be unconventional, but it just doesn't matter.
It's kind of perfectly placed on this CD though, with the sequencing. You know, if this was a dinner party 15-track compilation, you'd go, oh, what is that? You know, it's kind of culturally diverse, it's unusual sounding, you know. It's track 9, I believe, and it's I think it's kind of well placed. I really don't like the song, to be honest. Like I say, they're an impressive band otherwise, but this would definitely prick your ears up after Foxtrot.
They've got no shortage of kudos, and I don't think we have to therefore be too overly generous. However, I am very well aware that there's people that listen to this show that will be appalled at what I'm saying about them, because they are that band. You know, they're one of those bands going way back to when we talked about PJ Harvey and all that kind of thing. You're not really meant to criticise them.
Yeah, I mean, it stands out in the record for sure. It left an impression, definitely. It just really kind of annoyed me. Like, I'm totally the same as what you were both saying. I can admire it on a technical level. I admire the ambition and just the sheer attempt to try something a bit weird. And I actually quite like the fact that this song is on this collection of songs. It is a bit off the wall. Does that make it good? Not this song, I don't think. No, but it is more eye-catching. It's more ear-catching, I suppose.
Yeah.
Than most of the other songs in this record.
I tell you what makes it good, comparing it to the song that fucking follows it, right? There Goes My Outfit by the band The Deers.
Alright, already you got me. Broke inside and took it all away.
what the fuck is this shit? Like, but this is to me.
Sounds like Doves.
No, well, you know what? To me, it sounds like it's directly between the Ben Folds 5 and Train.
Some of us out here don't know shit. And some of us don't even want to know. Clearly this is my life.
You know, that kind of like horrible quasi light jazzy piano pop.
So, as a couple of Scottish boys, do you remember the ad in probably late 90s? It was you know more crowded house songs than you think you do, and it was for the best of crowded house, and it was called For a Recurring Dream. And I love crowded house, to be honest.
Lying in the dark, and I think that I'm beginning to know her. Let it go, I'll be there when you call.
But this is like Kunzelhuis. This is, you know, it's so forgettable.
It's so fuck it. Oh, this is like beige bloke rock. It just happens to be in an American accent, like you said, Doves. But there's the Yank croon to it, that eggy Yankiness as well. That's just
Eggy's voice is definitely eggy. Apparently, so Murray A. Lightburn, who is the singer and primary songwriter for the band, he's in the band with his wife Natalia Janchik. He's often been called the Black Morrissey due to his vocal similarity.
Morrissey won't like that.
He won't like that. But I think it's actually quite accurate though. His voice is quite similar to Morrissey's, I think.
Do you hear the crowded house thing that I hear?
Musically, I think, yeah, it doesn't feel American, Canadian. He's Canadian.
I've got mud and blood all over my face. Clearly this isn't my life. There goes my face.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel as though it is from that side of the world. It does feel as though it should be more English apart from the American accent. And to be honest, it could be English and still have an American accent. We all the fucking bands that are English and have American accents anyway, so...
Mark, is that more insulting to Morrissey, or is comparing him to Morrissey more insulting to him? Because I think they're both guilty of very different crimes here.
I think I would say so, yeah.
Morrissey's voice to me is a lot more interesting and less eggy than this, even though I really don't like it. But at the same time, comparing this poor bastard to Morrissey these days, that is just getting worse and worse and worse, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a quote that did not age well.
So here's another little aside as well, talking about band names. There's a lot of good band names on this Covermount CD, but the Deers, I think that takes the cake for... You're sitting at a bar and it's, oh yeah, I am or I was in a band. Oh, what were you called? The Deers. D-E-A-R-S.
You'd have to specify E. Yeah, exactly.
It's like a terrible name. I like the song name. There Goes My Outfit. You know, we've all been there. You got egg on your flannel, Chris. But just Kunzelhuis.
Yeah.
Well, they're still going.
Are they?
He's still doing solo stuff, and yeah. They're on the record label called Danger Bird Records, which I believe is a home to Sebadoh at one point. A Swerve Driver.
Those Danger Birds outside my window are they're getting a bit edgy.
Crag, I feel we have to weigh in a little bit on track 11 here, and it's a track that has come up on this podcast. It must be at least a dozen times now in our run. The band is of Montreal, and the track is controversially Suffer for Fashion.
We just want to emasculate them forever, forever, forever. British sirens don't go flat. It's not supposed.
So first of all, this track itself really quite glam, loads of David Bowie and T-Rex, and even a kind of campy version of like Devo, that kind of thing.
Do you know what it gave me vibes of? Right, ELO. Lots of yellow.
Okay.
Vocally.
So here's the thing, right? I don't disagree with that. But I really struggle to reconcile this track with this band. I'm pretty sure Crag probably does as well, because I was going to initially say, let's discuss how totally misleading this tune is. And what I realised was that's actually not the truth. It's the opposite, in fact, because I went to see Of Montreal, and they played an entire set of this kind of stuff, and it was completely fucking average. just flamboyant glam pop nonsense, and I got absolutely nothing from it. And then because they know how people feel about their band, they then completely changed the set, they changed their costumes and everything, and came out and did like a 14-minute version of what is by far and away the best piece of music they've done, and for me one of the best pieces of music anybody's ever done, a track called The Past is a Grotesque Animal, which sounds fucking nothing like this whatsoever.
I need you here and not here too. How can I explain? I need you here and not here too.
The reason I'm so glad that Crag's here is because I first heard The Past is a Grotesque Animal on a shift in the bar that he managed where I was a sound engineer, and I remember going up to the bar and being like, what is this fucking song? This is incredible. That track is, to this day, and I've said it multiple times, I'll say it again, one of the best bits of music.
Yeah,
I know,
you brought that to the table on my Australian radio show when we did a mammoth 5.5 hour session. That wasn't
fucking monster.
That wasn't like no one pressed record or anything. It was just you had a lot to get off your chest.
Yep.
Track 11 on this, kind of well sequenced again. Of Montreal, another cool band name. Suffer for Fashion, good song name. But for me, it's a bit too on the nose. Where, you know, the lyrics about the BPM, the chat, it's like, it's really hipster as fuck. And for me, like, if I was to make a comparison like you guys have, it would be Talking Heads. It kind of got lively, but it left me kind of cold for a band that I know can be a lot better. Yeah, again, not the best.
It's kind of goofy, that song, isn't it?
Yeah, I just think it's like, it's just too on the nose, because they know they're better than this, and it's
I don't, this is what I think's interesting though. I don't think we share, I know that we don't share the same perspective on of Montreal as they do of themselves, right? Because clearly to us, at least the two of us, Craig, you and I, The Past is a Grotesque Animal is what that band is about. To them, they have an entire career, an entire library of music that doesn't sound like that they're like, no, this is our band. And there's this area of their audience, which I would suggest is probably quite a large area of their audience, that refuses to accept that, given that they agreed to close their fucking show with that song. No matter what this band does, unless they somehow out of their ass one day pull something truly spectacular, for me, I think they must be the most disproportionately weighted band in terms of one song so unbelievably overshadowing the rest of their catalogue for me. Like, there are loads of bands that have one great song and a lot of dross, but the discrepancy, I can't think of another band that has such a huge discrepancy.
One thing it puts me in mind of, I don't know them, and I thought the song was you know, whatever, but just picking up on your last point there, Craig, one thing that we've noticed, and is definitely a recurring theme throughout all these cover mounts, is that all the bigger bands, all the most well-known bands, they never put their big songs on the record.
Yeah, unless you're TV and the radio.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that seems to be the exception, the only exception. Even your Corns and your Limp Bizkits, even Susie and the Banshees and Al Green, for example, right, just weren't picking their best songs. It's got to be a money thing. It has to be, 100%.
I think Uncut had the money.
I'm really not convinced that it's as transactional as that it's just like, oh, here, you know, we'll pay you X amount based on the quality of your song. Oh, well, we'll give you a shitter song for half the price. I really don't think it's as simple as that. I think it's probably a lot of give and take with regards to exclusives and agents and media people, and some of them probably pay and others probably don't, and I think it's way more complicated than that. I think ultimately though, if the band really wants a strong song put forward to really capture people's attention and thinks the compilation in the magazine's worth it, they'll do it. I just think it suggests that of Montreal, on one hand, maybe really wanted to push the fact that they're more than just this one song that doesn't sound like the rest of their catalogue, or on the other hand, didn't think that the Uncut compilation was really worth their while really pushing the boat out. TV and the radio seemed to come out on a different side of that decision. I don't think we can really... There's only so much to be gained for speculating about that. I think what is clear, though, is just that this is, to me, a million miles away from what this band do best, but unfortunately they only ever did that once, and so therefore I can understand why they didn't use it. Plus, it's fucking 12 minutes long, so it's not like Uncut were going to put on that song anyway. This was their only option, and so they kind of, you know, painted themselves into a corner with that. Track 12, The Decemberists, Yankee Bayonet.
porch bow high.
But you are in the ground.
Incredibly watery. This song, this is another band that I know a lot. I tried to get into. A lot of people were like, "Yeah, Decemberists, good kind of hip, interesting indie band, had like a real hipster credential to them." I always found them a bit emo. Didn't really work for me. Really unmemorable. The guys, the nasal voice, I didn't like it. The male-female trade-off's quite good, but it's the wrong side of kind of Americana to me as well.
There was a whole side of music, especially in the UK at the time. It was like bands like Elbow and The National and all the rest of it, and they had a couple of bangers here and there. If the Deers that we talked about before are a kind of bastard child of Crowded House, then these guys are the same thing with R.E.M.
I got R.E.M. as well. Yeah.
But when the sun breaks to no more bullets in Battle Creek, then will you make a grave where I will be?
Remember Stirling Castle when R.E.M. played that, Chris?
Can't forget it. Greatest night of my life.
Anyone who's out there in podcast land, look up when R.E.M. came to the tiny town of Stirling where Chris and I lived and played at Stirling Castle, and it was the biggest thing since a statue of Mel Gibson. But I couldn't handle the end of this song.
For me with the sun bright sparrow, I will come on the breath of the wind.
I can imagine a gig where everyone's like sitting down, swaddling wains, if that's what you call it, eating mung beans and kind of knitting, and each band member is just a fucking doctor or psychologist for wains and that can't deal with tying their shoelaces and...
I mean, this band are probably single-handedly responsible for Mumford & Sons, I think. So, do you think there's any coincidence that this record came out in 2007 and Mumford & Sons started in 2007 as well?
Did they? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah. I was going to mention them in the context.
This came out. I don't know. My extensive.
No, this was
March 07, yeah.
March. But I was going to mention Mumford & Sons, but because they are the cash-in on that entire movement. They were the banjos and flannel and wooden instruments. Get wooden instruments on the stage. People love it right now. Get a snare drum that's just a snare drum there, and someone just it's like brushes and all that kind of like twee fucking faux shit. Give them a waistcoat. Give them a waistcoat and get the buttons to fuck. They've got to lace up these shirts. It's just. Yeah, there is definitely that. I don't think Decemberists are guilty of that. I think they seem to me like a kind of Americana-influenced emo band, or a bunch of guys that were in emo stuff, or, very mixed genders that were in emo stuff, and then drifted towards Americana.
I don't get that at all. I get a kind of impression that they're people who do other things in their life, and this is like, they're talented people. They can do all the things, and they're like, all right, we're not exactly Shakira and good looking and dancing and all that kind of thing. So what is our angle going to be? And it's just a bunch of guys who are probably pediatricians and X-ray guys, and just that's the impression I get from it.
I just don't think the Decemberists, from what I've heard, have the songs. I just they don't do anything for me, and this one is consistent with that.
Are they still going?
Yeah, they are still going.
Yeah. It's the kind of music that doesn't really outlive anything, does it? Because it's already pitched at people that think they're 20 years older than they actually are.
Yeah, you're sitting in mono, eating mung beans.
Eating your children and knitting with mung beans. So track 13, Final Fantasy. Now this is an interesting one because first of all, we made a playlist online and you can't fucking find this tune anywhere.
No hope for the village, no hope for the village. The merchants in a mist and with a barrel fist, he's covered every surface.
The track is called This Lamb Sells Condos, not condoms, as the typo on my screen suggests. Although I'm sure they would be wonderful lamb's wool condoms. But Final Fantasy is an interesting one. So Final Fantasy, aka Owen Palette, will refer to Owen by their pronoun, which I think is quite specifically the case since a certain time in their career. Sibling of, is it Narina Palette, who I think was also pretty big around about this time. First off, I will say I don't particularly like the song. Owen's stuff was quite eclectic. They won a 2006 Polaris Prize for He Poos Clouds.
Yeah, the album this is on.
An actual fucking name of an album, He Poos Clouds, which was all kind of orchestral, and that's what I always remembered. Owen plays violin and I think a series of other kind of more classical appropriate instruments. Owen was also really uncomfy with that Polaris association, so gave the money away to different bands that they felt were struggling at the time. They were also, I don't know if they were a permanent member, but they were fairly regularly involved with Arcade Fire, hence linking back to the title of this compilation. And also, Owen and Win Butler did the soundtrack to the movie Her. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie, yeah.
But interesting that we were talking so much about R.E.M. on the previous track, because Owen Pallett has recorded with R.E.M. as well as, get this, Taylor Swift, Duran Duran, Robbie Williams, the Pet Shop Boys, Alex Turner, and Linkin fucking Park. So done pretty well for themselves over the course, but I don't think the solo career was really the highlight of that. I did flirt with it. There was one track in particular, name of which escapes me right now, that I remember I would stick on compilations, mixtapes as we used to call them, pretty regularly. But yeah, nothing. There was no meat to the back catalogue, and this is just another example of it. Eclecticism for the sake of it. It just leaves me a wee bit cold at the end of it. It's fancy, it's interesting, it's baroque, it's novel, but it doesn't.
So
really
when I first saw this on the list, I had it in my head that it was Crystal Castles for some reason, which is a totally different thing.
Quite different.
Yeah, very cool.
So I had to dig out a live version of this from YouTube, and I kind of dug it actually. I found this really pleasant. And I would love to see it live. But it's definitely kind of like a sleazy's vibe, and this is that dinner party thing kind of coming in as well. It's good sequencing for this stage of the CD. I don't know if you noticed about a minute ago, my microphone just rumbled. There was actually an earthquake. So we've had literally had an earthquake on the podcast.
Bob the Dog didn't seem too bothered by it.
Oh, Bob the Dog doesn't give a fuck. That's his whole stock and trade.
Yeah, this song is genuinely bizarre. I think I've seen it classified as 21st century classical music. Is that right? I don't know. Apparently the album deals with like Dungeons and Dragons, Legend of Zelda, Chronicles of Narnia. Anyway, they're still on Domino Records, and apparently they still get quite a lot of acclaim for their records, and good that they're making a career out of it.
Island is a better name than He Poos Clouds.
Yeah, definitely.
Slightly. I mean, it's definitely more boring and less memorable, but also less.
But talking about good names, Know Your Onions.
Know your
exclamation mark.
So the band is The Shins. This is track 14, penultimate song. It's taken for their debut 2001 album, O Inverted World, and that to me is an interesting decision. This is not a great Shins cut, and the thing is, the Shins do have some absolute belters of songs, not least on their 2003 album Shoots Too Narrow, which was obviously already out in 2007, and it's just got so many better options to pick if you want people to get into the Shins.
I find a fatal flaw in the logic of love and go out of my head. You love a sinking stone that'll never heal up, so get used to the love.
Wincing the Night Away, which is also a pretty solid album, would come out about 8 months after this compilation, so certainly Shoots Too Narrow presented some far stronger options. I think they also had a a very good song in the soundtrack to Garden State, and that track probably deserved more airtime as well. I have no idea why this really perplexes me. So the metric one I get, because didn't want to give away Monster Hospital, that kind of thing. I don't get why with a better, more recent album with more standout killer songs that was already 3 or 4 years old, they couldn't dip into that, put out some of those tunes, because they were better songs. Early Shins, this period of Shins is totally meh. For a lot of people, the Shins are totally meh anyway, but they are one of the few bands from that kind of meh, safe indie scene that I think backed it up with really good songwriting, and therefore they still work for me. I get that they are quite vanilla, but they have very good songs to go with that. This is not one of them.
I don't mind this song, to be honest, and I think the Shins have a lot to answer for. There was
literally, because one of them got cancelled. So.
Yeah, there was a lot of this kind of stuff going on in the UK at the time, and probably before that. Like when I was listening to the song, I got suggested a band called the Dakinis, who I think are from Cumbernauld or whatever. Are the Shins Canadian? Where are they from? Are they?
No, I think they're American. I think they're something like Portland or something like that.
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, really? Because they came out in Sub Pop. I always associated them with the West Coast as a result.
What's your take on? What's your hot take on Onions?
I'm a fan of them. They make a nice base of a curry. I like the red ones. I like the white ones. I like the Spanish ones. I like a nice shallot, although they're a bit footery cut.
Footery, translate for the Neds.
Footery is just a wee bit fiddly and it's a bit complicated to cut those shallots, you know. Just run them under a wee bit of cold water, or you can freeze them, actually. Stick them in the freezer and you won't cry as much.
Yeah, it's a good tip, that, actually.
Well, I guess we get to the last song then. Track 15 by the band Clap Your Hands, Say Yeah. The tune's called Underwater, and this is boring. It's on beat indie rock, you know. It's got that sort of just that bam 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 drum thing, which sometimes works really well, but only if you have, you know, a big bombast or a really good hook behind it, because otherwise it's just bam 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 and there's nothing happening. You know, the music itself is, I would probably categorise it as amiable, but really benign, which is a word that we've brought up a couple of times now. I actually had already done my notes and only then realised I saw this band. I saw this band like 2 months ago at the QMU, and
that recent, yeah.
That shows you, yeah, and that shows you how much I remembered it. I was offered a ticket by a friend. I was like, sure, I'll go along. It was totally fine, vaguely jazzy in places. Like they were good players. I will say that the people in the band can really fucking play, but the gig was kind of a snooze. They have a song called "The Skin of My Yellow Country Teeth," and you know, the weird thing is you will remember it from playlists, because it's one of those indie tunes that, you know, you hear it in cafes and stuff, but you never really care enough to find out who it is. And that was only that night that I realised, oh, that's who that fucking song is by. You will definitely know it.
This kind of comes full circle for me. Again, another cool band name, Clap Your Hands Say Yeah. Great.
Is it? And is it? Really? I don't think that's a cool band name at all. I think
it is. You didn't mention it. It's called Underwater, but then there's a bracket, and you know I love a bracket. And it's You and Me. And that's not to be confused with the You and Me song by the Wannadies. And actually, that tune would fit perfectly on this CD, but that's from 1994. It's kind of circular in those styles. Like we talked about earlier on about, is this North American indie scene being a bit of a rip-off of that kind of Britpop movement? You know, like someone mentioned, like The Coral and all these kind of bands that weren't Oasis or Blur, you know, all these bands who were doing this stuff. But yeah, I just hear the Wannadies on this.
It was always you and me, always. You tell me I'm a real man. Try to.
You know, I think it's interesting because Uncut, I think I said this way at the start, are trying to create the idea of a zeitgeist. And I think what you're saying is that, yeah, there's sort of parallels in recent musical history, but the British stuff did have a togetherness. I mean, it's first of all, it's a smaller landmass, and a lot of these bands were crossing paths and sharing stages, and the influences were probably tighter in terms of the pool as well. But
The Blue Tones, the Verve, I don't know, rattle out some names, you know.
you do really feel like those bands like Shed 7 and all that as well, they were all like overlapping with each other, whereas these bands, it's very unlike that a lot of them did. I realised that Broken Social Scene and Metric share a member, but a lot of the rest of it feels a little bit contrived. It doesn't feel like there is the same sense of similarity or coming from the same place. We've actually named bands that I think have a stronger sense of similarity, you know, like Arcade Fire and even Fleet Foxes, for example. They're a band that should be part of this conversation.
For sure,
that kind of new indie folk conversation.
Come down from the mountain, you have been gone too long. The spring is upon us.
This collection doesn't really summarise that to me. I think it's trying to be something.
It does summarise. We were talking about the kind of monetization of it and the labels and stuff, and things like Arcade Fire not being on this is probably quite criminal because they're the arbiter of this whole 15-track playlist.
Yeah, they're the kind of sun that the whole concept is orbiting around
exactly.
as well, and it's they're absent. So I think, as we've said so many times, it is just a little bit bland. It's a little bit potatoey. I used to like corduroy earlier on, and I think that sums up a lot of that scene. You know, it's kind of indie rock that your parents could kind of approve of, never too challenging. And actually, something did occur to me that I feel in a way it tracks with a lot of the sort of lefty North American politics as well. You know, there's an overlap there where it became rhetorically quite progressive, that you get there's a very Democrat feel to a lot of this music, you know, that very nice guy, left-wing, modern, not too offensive. Like I said, that Icarus line sort of hostility and volatility was all gone. It was all quite tame.
That was kind of going on at the same time as well when you had a Salt and Shake from Smiths as your play piece. You know, it's like
that was gone, man. And I think this stuff is quite culturally conservative. Actually, you know, even though the politics of these bands is almost certainly quite liberal. I mean, as demonstrated by One Palette, for example, it's almost quite. It's definitely quite liberal and democratic and lefty and progressive. I think the sensibilities are quite conservative. It's quite tweed, it's quite flannel, it's quite corduroy, it's mild, and it's wary of causing offence by being too edgy. I think that's quite an interesting thing for me, because I'm not saying it's all bad, but it's certainly not very challenging. It just feels like quite a safe time.
Yeah, you're bang on,
music.
and I can imagine all of these bands would be very good in a live situation. And obviously, we've that's a different concept nowadays. You know,
competent, I think, is a better word than good. That's the thing. I think they would be competent. I don't know if a lot of them would be good.
I don't know. I guess we've got to the end of the CD, and Snog, Marry, Avoid. That's where we're at.
Yeah, so we usually at this point, listeners, if you've not listened to one of these episodes before, we kind of pick a best, a worst, and a wild card, or, you know, shag, marry, avoid, whatever. But I'll get the ball rolling. Best by a country mile, TV and the radio. Great tune, and a band putting their best foot forward. It's the only essential song on the entire collection. As we said, I think, you know, the Shins, Metric, Band of Horses, maybe even Deerhoof, they all have far better songs that they've decided understandably not to put on this. I get the thinking behind that, but you know, TV and the radio just went for it, and as a result they, you know, easily take that prize. In terms of the worst, the Deers, because it is actively insultingly bad. Swan Lake isn't far off, but I think that's kind of mainly just because of quite how much that song doesn't need to exist, because it's so fucking unremarkable and dull. But the Deers is offensively bad to me. And the wild card, I think, just I would refer back to of Montreal, because they wrote legitimately one of the best songs that I've ever heard, and no other song they've ever released is even in the same ballpark. I was just slightly conflicted. I would also mention Deerhoof, because they're a band I'm expected to like and I kind of like, but when I think about it, I just don't. And I don't really know what's going on with that conflict in me. Maybe they're the kind of thing that I'll get into just a wee bit too late. Like, good insoles in your shoes. That's something that I didn't realise until pretty late on in my life. I was like, these fucking things, this is actually quite nice. So maybe Deerhoof are like good insoles. I'll be sitting in mono, kicking back with a mung bean burger and listening to Deerhoof and some good insoles.
There's probably some kind of link you can make to hooves and insoles. Imagine deers with those cut out yellow and blue.
You're describing a Gary Larson cartoon that never happened.
Exactly. Do you want to go next, Mark?
Yeah, I think best with me again, like with Chris, man, it's always obviously Wolf Like Me by TV on the Radio stand out in this collection. It's not the weirdest song on it, but it feels strange and out of place, which kind of lifts this fairly benign, as I said at the start, compilation of songs which are so boring and inoffensive. It's who's it made for? It's for people who don't really want to think too much about their music, but I think bands like...
It's dinner party CD,
Yeah, TV and the Radio, maybe Broken Social Scene, maybe Deerhoof, even though I didn't really like it, would kind of make you think a little bit, what I mean? You have to sit and consider that. Most of the stuff you do not have to consider. Not even even if you like it, you don't need to consider it. If you don't like it, you definitely shouldn't have to consider it, so don't. The worst song is, yes, it's a Swan Lake song. Production, it's a bad song anyway. It's an aberration on a CD which is full of really, really dull stuff, and that's quite difficult to achieve. That's an achievement in itself, actually, I think. So yeah, that's the worst song for sure.
Can I just jump in with a note there? See, for every young musician that ever sent their demo to Jaguar, just think about that they chose to put out Swan Lake and they dinged your fucking demo.
Yeah.
Speaking for experience here, clearly.
Yeah.
And it got a fucking compilation. That probably, how we've spoken about in other episodes, where there'll be like the agent is like, maybe I'll give you this if you take one of these.
Exactly, trade.
It's definitely going to be one of them, right? It's like, I'll give you a Broken Social Scene, you got to take Swan Lake as well. The wild card is probably a Broken Social Scene for me, because it was more intriguing than I thought. I've heard of them. They didn't really seem as though they'd be the kind of band that I like, given the people that are involved in it. Do makes they think being the exception, I think. But no, I mean, I'll probably go back and listen to a little bit more of them, to be honest.
This wasn't one of the worst ones we've done, and for me, this was a hard one. It's all kind of samey, apart from my pick for the best, which is the same as yours, and probably the weirdest as well, and the worst together. So for my best, it was Wolf Like Me by TV and the Radio, but that was in running for weirdest as well, because it was that outlier, but it's like a banger, but it's perfectly placed, I think, on the CD. The worst for me and the weirdest for me are different from yours, which is unusual for us. The worst for me was Decemberists. I just hate it, especially towards the end. Like, I will come on the breath of the wind. Ha ha.
It's so fucking long as well, mate. Yeah, far too long, man. Fucking far too long, man.
just annoying. Super annoying. The weirdest, though, was Voxtrot.
If you think you're throwing words to the wise, the first thing you ever felt, it's sliding under your belt. To a place that smothers children, cuts the space between two lives. I've seen you working.
Because they were so out of place with the rest of it, and that should be a good thing, like the TV and the Radio song, but the band just don't really sound cohesive on that song, and I bet they're great live, and it's just a weird inclusion, that song on this. That's so it's between the best and the weirdest for me. The rest of it's a bit meh, it's dinner party music.
And I honestly get the feeling that that's kind of what that era was about. That era was just this era of quite tame, agreeable music that wasn't designed to be too challenging. And the bands that came out of it over here, good bands, but that was their vibe. It was cafe music. You can still hear loads of these tracks, or at least the other tracks by these bands in cafes. They clap your hands, say, yeah. I mean, I heard them in a cafe today.
But we got it through a magazine, so good on you.
Well, the point you just made there, saying you got it through a magazine, is a wee bit of reflection I was wanting to bring in this episode. So we've done a few of these now, and every single time we've created pretty much the same thing. Oh, it's not as bad as we thought. Oh, it's pretty bland. And I think we started this thinking there'd be quite a lot of banter, there'd be a lot of really shit songs to rip into, but for the most part it is just not the same kind of music, but the same kind of vibe. It's just bland songs. It's either bland songs by bands you'd never heard of before and don't exist anymore, or bland songs by really big bands.
Well, this was one of the better ones. Like I said, I went for a walk in the woods today with Doug, and I was like, I thought this was going to be, I was just going to slag the fuck out of it, but it's not that bad. It's inoffensive.
Can I sum it up?
Yeah, you can.
The headline, if this was a tabloid, Bland of Horses.
Bland of Horses, I like that.
Hey, we leave it on that note then?
No, we can leave it on that note, because you have to rustle the bag.
One day I would like to have this accursed duty taken from me.
Get that up to the mic.
Hope it's
Get some ASMR. Again. Get it up to the mic.
Oft. It's a fucking Bobby Dazzler, guys.
You said that last time as well.
No, it really is. Hang on, I'm just going to hold this up to the screen for reactions.
Okay, I say I had a wish list and this was on it.
It's Crag. Yes.
Incoming.
This is literally, this is actually quite iconic, right? So this is Incoming, the sounds of 2001 from Crag. It's a famous cover with a guy getting punched in the face, a boxer getting punched in the face. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm not even going to look at the back, I'm going to tell you the names that are picked out on the front. Linkin Park, Grand Theft Audio, 28 Days, Mudvayne, Sunna, Vast, Myocene, Nothing Face, Speed Dealer, Sugar Coma, Krakow, and more.
That's a good one. Obviously, the cover's a take on a Vulgar Display of Power by Pantera kind of thing, but 2001. Who else is on it? Just would have to give the whole game away. Sugar Coma, you had me out there.
Some unknown band called Los Profes.
Oh yeah.
El Nino, one of the true highlights. Mudvayne,
so
Mudvayne are on it.
I quite like
Downer. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. This is going to be interesting.
It's going to be a good one.
Right, well, fucking what a high note to leave things on.
Yes, indeed.
Alright, Mark, night,
right.
Crag,
Night, Chris.
Thank
good
you,
day,
boys.
Have a good day.